Imagine serving your country for 26 years, only to be thrown onto the street by your HOA over curtains. That's exactly what happened to Martin Gallagher when Sandra Clifton, a power-hungry HOA president, manipulated the rules to evict him from his own home. But what she didn't expect: a viral outrage, a legal powerhouse, and a neighborhood that finally decided to fight back. And trust me, you won't believe how this tyrant's reign came crashing down. Martin Gallagher had seen hell and lived to tell the tale. 26 years in the U.S. Army, 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. Enough combat experience to leave both his body and mind permanently scarred. The kind of man who didn't flinch at danger, who had stared death in the eye and walked away. But he wasn't looking for a fight anymore. At 67, all he wanted was peace. His home, a modest single-story house in a quiet HOA-controlled neighborhood, was supposed to be just that, a place where he could sit on his porch, drink his morning coffee, and maybe, just maybe, finally breathe. But the HOA had other plans. It started like most of their harassment campaigns with a letter, a bright white envelope stuffed in his mailbox, sealed with the HOA's self-important gold-embossed logo, Notice of Violation. Martin frowned as he read it. A fine for unauthorized window treatments. His brow furrowed. What the hell did that mean? His navy blue blackout curtains had been up for years. No one had ever said a word about them. Confused, he picked up the phone and dialed the HOA office. Big mistake. The second he mentioned his name, the voice on the other end turned cold. Mr. Gallagher, your curtains do not comply with HOA aesthetic standards, said Sandra Clifton, the HOA president herself, a woman whose voice always carried the same smug, rehearsed indifference as a bad customer service rep. All street-facing windows must have white sheers. You'll need to replace them immediately or face escalating fines. Martin felt his stomach tighten. White sheers? The flimsy kind that offered zero privacy, that let the whole damn world see into his home? Not a chance. This is my house, he said, forcing his voice to stay even. I've had those curtains for years. What's the problem now? A pause, then, rules evolve, Mr. Gallagher. If you don't like them, perhaps this isn't the right community for you. There it was, the threat hidden beneath the corporate politeness. Martin clenched his jaw. I'm not changing my damn curtains. Sandra sighed dramatically, as if she had 1,000 more important things to do than deal with an old veteran who wasn't cooperating. Very well, she said. Then the fines will continue to escalate. And escalate they did. $50, then $100, then $500, then $1,000. By the end of the second month, the total had ballooned to $10,000, 10 grand. For not switching out a damn piece of fabric, Martin ignored them. He'd fought for his country. He wasn't about to back down over some HOA nonsense. But what he didn't know was that the HOA wasn't playing fair. One morning, he woke up to the sound of pounding at his door. Not a polite knock, not the hesitant tap of a concerned neighbor. A relentless, authoritative pounding that set off every alarm in his brain. He pulled on his robe and swung open the door, only to be met with 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies, and in one of their hands, an eviction notice. Martin's stomach dropped. Mr. Gallagher, you need to vacate the property immediately, one of the deputies said. His voice wasn't unkind, but there was finality in it. Martin snatched the notice and read through it in disbelief. Foreclosure. The HOA had somehow maneuvered around legal loopholes, tacking on fabricated late fees, HOA dues, and administrative penalties to his unpaid fines. In their eyes, he wasn't a homeowner anymore, just another delinquent who had failed to pay his dues. And just like that, his home was no longer his. A noise from the street snapped his head up. A tow truck idled at the curb, waiting to seize his old Ford F-150. The same truck he'd had since his last deployment. The same truck that had carried him home from Walter Reed when he was discharged with his injuries. The last thing he truly owned. And standing beside it, arms crossed, a satisfied smirk on her lips. Sandra Clifton. You should have followed the rules, Mr. Gallagher, she said, mock sympathy dripping from every syllable. Martin's hands clenched into fists. He'd fought for his country. He'd bled for it. And now, over some HOA power trip, he was being tossed onto the street like garbage. And the worst part? No one stopped it. The neighbors peeked through their windows, watching but saying nothing. Some looked sympathetic. Others quickly turned away, afraid to get involved. And just like that, a decorated war veteran was homeless, over a pair of curtains. Martin sat on the curb, his back resting against the same driveway where his truck used to sit just an hour ago. Now, the truck was gone. His home was gone. His entire life, stripped away over a pair of damn curtains. The sheriff's deputy, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, stood awkwardly beside him. Maybe he felt bad. Maybe he didn't. Didn't matter. The law was the law, even when it was being used as a weapon. Martin exhaled, rubbing his face. He'd survived war zones, but this was a different kind of hell. The neighborhood watch's people had gathered. They always did when there was drama. Some watched from their porches, gripping their morning coffee cups like it was just another Tuesday. Others peeked through half-closed blinds, afraid to be seen but unable to look away. A few whispered, "Is this even legal? I heard the HOA has done this before." God, he's a veteran. This is messed up. But no one did anything. No one spoke up. Why? Because everyone knew how the HOA operated. Sandra Clifton ran the neighborhood like a dictator with a clipboard. If you crossed her, she'd make your life miserable. Fines, complaints, anonymous reports to city inspectors. Some families had even moved out just to escape her harassment. So most of them just watched, silent, helpless. The first to break the silence. Then someone snapped. Emily Carter, a 34-year-old single mom who lived 2 doors down. She wasn't rich, she wasn't powerful, but she was pissed, and she wasn't about to stay quiet. She stormed toward Sandra Clifton, her face flushed with rage. "This is disgusting," she spat, pointing at Martin. "You threw out a veteran over curtains?" Sandra, standing with that same smug expression, barely blinked. He didn't comply. Rules are rules. Martin saw Emily's hands ball into fists. For a second, he thought she might actually swing at Sandra, and damn if he wouldn't have paid to see that. Instead, she spun around, facing the growing crowd. "Is this what we're okay with?" she demanded. "Watching a man who served this country get tossed on the street because his curtains weren't HOA approved?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. She'd hit a nerve. A couple of people nodded. A few exchanged glances. Someone muttered, "It's not right." But fear is a powerful thing. For every person who agreed, there were twice as many who stayed quiet, because they knew the risk. Sandra Clifton ruled with an iron fist, and speaking against her, that was asking for trouble. The second to speak then, another voice joined in. David Wren, a former lawyer, now semi-retired. He'd lived in the neighborhood for years, but mostly kept to himself. Never caused trouble, never spoke at HOA meetings. But right now, he wasn't staying silent. He stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. "Martin," he said evenly. "Do you have a place to go?" Martin exhaled through his nose. He knew the question was coming. He just hated the answer. No. Silence. The weight of that single word hung in the air. His family was gone. No wife, no kids, no siblings. The only people he'd ever called brothers were either dead or scattered across the country. Sandra smirked, crossing her arms. "Well, that's unfortunate." Martin didn't even look at her. But David? Oh, David was looking right at her, and he wasn't backing down. "If you think this is over," David said, his voice steady, "you're dead wrong." Sandra laughed right in his face. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "Good luck finding a judge who cares." What she didn't know, David had connections, and Sandra Clifton had just picked a fight with the wrong people. David wasn't bluffing. The moment Sandra Clifton laughed in his face and told him to, "Good luck finding a judge who cares," she sealed her fate. Because if there was one thing David Wren understood better than anyone, it was how to drag someone through the legal system and make it hurt. And he wasn't alone. Emily Carter was already lighting a fire online, the petition that started a movement. Emily wasn't the kind of person to take injustice sitting down. Her first post, A photo of Martin sitting on the curb, his duffel bag at his feet, his house in the background, now under HOA control, went viral overnight. Her caption: "Imagine serving your country for 26 years, only to be thrown on the street by your HOA over curtains. This is happening right now in our neighborhood. Make it make sense." The internet erupted. The post racked up over 15,000 shares in a matter of hours. Comments poured in from veterans, homeowners, and pissed-off citizens from all over the country. "I swear these HOA tyrants think they're running a kingdom. This is disgusting." A veteran? "Over curtains? I hope someone sues them into the ground." "Where can we donate to fight this? This Sandra lady needs to be dragged. What's her full name?" Then someone, no one knows who, tagged the local news station, and that's when everything exploded. The media frenzy begins by day 3. A full-blown news crew was parked outside the HOA office. Cameras, lights, reporters in suits. And Sandra Clifton, for the first time in her miserable reign, she was sweating. She'd spent years playing the neighborhood tyrant, years making people too afraid to challenge her. She never expected anyone to fight back, but now the whole country was watching. She tried to stay inside, pretend it wasn't happening. That lasted about 5 minutes before a bold young reporter caught her in the parking lot, microphone in hand. "Miss Clifton, can you explain why an elderly war veteran was evicted over curtains?" Sandra kept walking. "Miss Clifton, do you think this was an appropriate use of HOA authority?" Her grip tightened on her car keys. Then, "Did the HOA manipulate foreclosure laws?" That one hit. She stopped, turned, and just like that, the cameras were rolling. Sandra's worst nightmare, going viral on live TV. Sandra forced a smile, the same one she'd used to steamroll homeowners for years. "Mr. Gallagher repeatedly violated the HOA's regulations and refused to cooperate," she said, voice as smooth as if she were reading a script. "We gave him every opportunity to comply, but unfortunately, we cannot allow exceptions to community standards." "Then explain this." A reporter shoved a stack of printed papers into the shot. Martin's fine statements. And right there, bolded and underlined, was something Sandra wasn't prepared to answer. The rule about HOA approved white shears was added after Martin received his first fine. The camera zoomed in. The entire country just watched her get caught. Sandra froze. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The reporter didn't let up. "Miss Clifton, did the HOA change its bylaws specifically to target Mr. Gallagher?" Sandra blinked, her usual smug confidence gone. "Miss Clifton, are you aware that several legal experts have already called this a clear case of HOA overreach and wrongful foreclosure?" Sandra opened her mouth, then shut it, because she knew she was screwed. The internet goes for blood. By the time Sandra slammed her car door and sped off, the video was already uploaded to Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. It was everywhere. The hashtags blew up. #HoTyranny, #Justice for Martin, #No more HOA bullies, and the comments, "Oh, she's done. This is going to be a lawsuit from hell." That moment when you realize you just got caught in 4K LMAO. Look at her face when she sees the evidence. She knows she's going to jail. Look at her panic. Hope her LinkedIn is up to date because she's about to be unemployed. Meanwhile, Emily's petition passed 25,000 signatures. Veterans groups started sharing it. Even a local congressman retweeted the video, calling for an investigation. And just like that, Sandra Clifton's entire empire began to crumble. For years, Sandra Clifton had weaponized the HOA like her own personal fiefdom. She dictated who could park where, what colors were acceptable, and how high people's grass could grow. She used bureaucracy like a blade, cutting down anyone who dared challenge her authority. And for years, she got away with it. She'd bullied, extorted, and manipulated homeowners into submission. Fines, legal threats, foreclosure notices. She had the entire rulebook memorized. But this time, she messed with the wrong man. Because Martin Gallagher wasn't just another retiree. He was a combat veteran, a fighter. And though he didn't start this battle, he damn sure was going to finish it. The investigation that took Sandra down. After Sandra's train wreck of an interview went viral, the fallout was immediate. First, a local prosecutor launched an inquiry into the HOA's practices. Then, the state attorney general got involved, and within days, investigative reporters started digging into the HOA's finances. And oh, did they find things. Fraudulent fees. Sandra had been slapping homeowners with fines for rules that weren't even in the bylaws. Manipulated foreclosures. Multiple families had been forced out of their homes under suspiciously similar circumstances. Financial misconduct. HOA funds had been misallocated for administrative expenses, including Sandra's personal travel and luxury dining. The moment that report aired on national television, it was game over. The state attorney general's office announced a formal investigation into HOA fraud. The HOA board, they panicked. And Sandra? She ran. Literally. Resigned overnight, disconnected her phone, probably thought she could quietly disappear before the legal hammer dropped. She was wrong. The veterans who wouldn't let this go. Martin's story had reached the right people. A national veterans advocacy group took notice, and they were pissed. They launched a full-scale campaign demanding justice for Martin and other veterans who had been targeted by HOAs across the country. Their message was simple. You don't get to throw away the people who fought for this country like they're nothing. They raised thousands of dollars in legal funds. Then, a high-powered law firm picked up Martin's case. Pro bono. Sandra Clifton had spent her career burying homeowners in legal fees, forcing them to give up. But now, she was the one drowning in lawsuits. The courtroom reckoning. 3 months later, Martin got the call he'd been waiting for. Mr. Gallagher, you might want to come down to the courthouse. When he arrived, Sandra Clifton was already there. She wasn't smiling anymore. She wasn't smug. She looked like a woman who knew she was about to lose everything. The judge didn't just overturn Martin's eviction. He shredded the HOA's case. The foreclosure was ruled fraudulent. Every fine issued against Martin was voided. The HOA was ordered to pay damages. And then came the final blow. Martin's lawyer stood up and handed the judge a thick stack of documents. Your Honor, these are statements from multiple homeowners who were similarly targeted by Miss Clifton's unlawful enforcement of HOA policies. Sandra turned pale, because Martin wasn't the only one she had screwed over. And now, they all had lawyers. Sandra Clifton loses everything. By the time the legal dust settled, Sandra was removed from her position as HOA president. She was personally sued for HOA fraud. She was ordered to pay restitution to every homeowner she had illegally fined, and she was facing potential criminal charges. The entire HOA board crumbled. They tried to save themselves by throwing Sandra under the bus. Didn't work. They were all forced to resign. The HOA was placed under new leadership, and on a state level, lawmakers introduced new bills designed to stop HOAs from pulling this kind of stunt ever again. Sandra vanished from public life. Her name became synonymous with HOA corruption. If you Googled her, the first thing that popped up was her disaster of a news interview, Martin's homecoming. 3 months after losing everything, Martin stood in front of his house again. Only this time, it was his. No foreclosure notice, no tow truck waiting to take his truck, no Sandra Clifton standing there, smirking like she had won. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. It smelled the same. The floors creaked the same way they always had. But this time, it felt different. Because now he knew. No one was ever going to take this from him again. The neighborhood was different too, more alive. People actually spoke to each other now. They weren't afraid anymore. Emily was there, David too, even some of the neighbors who had stayed silent before. "Welcome home, Martin," Emily said, smiling. Martin nodded. He didn't say much, didn't need to. He walked to his living room, looked up at his window. And there, still hanging exactly where they had always been, his navy blue curtains.